cold wind whipped through the streets, biting at the skin, but for Eliza, the chill was nothing compared to the storm brewing in her heart. She stood there, alone in the shadows, watching the sleek black car parked across the street. It belonged to him, Victor Marshall, the millionaire businessman whose name was whispered in every corner of the city. But Eliza wasn't here to beg. She wasn't like the others who looked at him as a source of salvation. She had a different plan, a secret that could shatter everything. Her breath came in quick bursts, her fingers trembling not from the cold, but from the weight of what she knew. A few months ago, she had overheard a conversation she was never meant to hear. A conversation about Victor's dark dealings, his manipulations, and the dangerous game he played with lives, including hers. It was supposed to be a casual encounter, but now it was her only weapon. Eliza stepped forward, her feet crunching against the snow-covered pavement, her eyes locked on Victor as he exited the car. The look in his eyes was calm, almost too calm, like a predator sizing up its prey. But today the tables would turn. Today he would face a different kind of danger. "You shouldn't be here," Victor said, his voice low but with an edge that sent a chill down her spine. Eliza didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "Don't be naive, Victor," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper, yet filled with a strange power. "It's a trap." The words hung in the air, charged with a tension neither of them could escape. What was she talking about? What did she know? As Eliza spoke, the world seemed to stop. The quiet hum of the city faded, leaving only the pounding of her heart. In that moment, everything would change. The city was a sprawling masterpiece of glass and steel, glittering in the fading twilight like a kingdom carved from ambition and power. Skyscrapers towered above the streets, each one a monument to success, and at the center of it all stood Victor Marshall. His name was synonymous with wealth. Houses in every major city, luxury yachts dotting the coastlines, and a private jet that never seemed to land. He lived a life most could only dream of, with every desire met before it was even uttered. But beneath the perfect veneer, something darker pulsed. Victor was more than just a millionaire. He was a king, with a kingdom built on ruthless decisions and cold calculations. The eyes of the world were always on him, whether it was on a podium at a charity event or in the boardroom, where he commanded respect with nothing more than a glance. His tailored suits, crisp and precise, were symbols of his control over everything and everyone. Yet, despite the wealth, the power, the influence, there was something elusive about him, something that no one could quite grasp. He never seemed happy, even as he stood on the balcony of his penthouse suite, overlooking the city that bowed to his presence. A hint of something darker lingered behind his eyes. He had everything, but it wasn't enough. The loneliness that came with his power was a heavy cloak he wore, one that even the wealthiest surroundings couldn't disguise. His fingers gripped the railing, his gaze distant, as if searching for something that didn't exist in the view below. And in the midst of this grand life, Eliza was waiting. Eliza hadn't meant to stumble upon the conversation. It was late, and she'd been walking along the narrow alley behind the exclusive downtown restaurant where she worked. Just another day, just another night. But the voices in the dark were what stopped her in her tracks. "Do you think she'll really do it?" The voice was hushed but carried through the crack in the alley door. Victor's voice followed, smooth and calculating. "She has no choice." Eliza's pulse quickened. She knew the voice. It was him, the man who everyone worshipped, the man who thought he controlled everything. But what was he talking about? Who was she? And what did he mean by no choice? Her heart skipped. She stepped closer, just enough to hear more, but not enough to be seen. The conversation was about a deal, one that was darker than anything she had ever imagined. It wasn't about business or charity. It was about manipulation, control, and, most chillingly, lives. Victor Marshall wasn't the man he appeared to be. And Eliza knew now that the danger wasn't just for those caught in his web. It was for her too. The next day, she did what she had to do. She bought a ticket for a different path. One that would take her straight into the heart of Victor's world. And she would expose everything. But as she sat in that quiet cafe, staring at the news headline on her phone about a major philanthropic event hosted by Marshall Enterprises, Eliza realized something horrifying. The trap had already been set. And this time, it wasn't her that had to be careful. The world of Victor Marshall was not as smooth as it appeared, for lurking behind his polished exterior were men who did not share his dream of a life filled with wealth and public approval. Instead, they thrived on power, the kind of power that didn't depend on the public's gaze but on silent manipulation, control, and bloodied hands. One of these men was Garrett Hayes, a ruthless fixer who made his fortune cleaning up messes that could ruin the reputations of people like Victor, the kind of mess that could shatter a man's empire. He had a sharp mind, a sharper tongue, and no morals to speak of. His office was a mausoleum for secrets, a place where life and death were discussed over coffee, and betrayals were as common as the morning sun. Garrett was the kind of man who believed the world could be bent to his will, and with Victor under his thumb, he was making that belief a reality. Victor thinks he's in control, Garrett said, staring at the city skyline from his office window, the lights of downtown blinking below. But he's just a pawn. He doesn't see the game I'm playing. He turned slowly to face his companion, a woman whose icy calm and steel-gray eyes mirrored his own. Her name was Celine Moore, and she was just as dangerous as Garrett. A former intelligence operative with a past she buried deeper than most would dare to ask. Celine had a reputation for getting things done. Quietly, efficiently, and with deadly precision. She was the one who handled the details, the little things that kept the plan from unraveling. And she wasn't about to let Victor Marshall get in her way. Does he suspect anything? Celine asked, her voice a low, controlled whisper. Garrett's lips curled into a dark smile. Not yet, but it's only a matter of time. We're almost there. Once we take him down, everything we've worked for will fall into place. Their plot was simple in its complexity. Make Victor feel safe. Feed him the illusion of control. And then, when he least expected it, pull the rug out from under him. They would take everything, his money, his reputation, and if necessary, his life. The trap had been set, and all that was left to do was wait. Eliza had never intended to get involved in the dangerous web Victor had woven. Her life, though far from perfect, had been manageable until now. She had come to the city to start over, to escape a life that had offered nothing but hardship and regret. But now, as the weight of what she had overheard hung heavily in her chest, she realized that she had become a part of something much larger, something far more dangerous. It was late, and she had been doing her usual rounds, clearing up the cafe before heading home to her small apartment in the rundown part of the city. But something felt different that night. The air was thick with tension, and as she pushed open the cafe's back door, she saw him, Victor Marshall, walking out of a nearby building, his figure framed by the harsh lights of the street lamps. He looked different than she remembered, more vulnerable, more human. And for the first time, Eliza saw him not as the untouchable millionaire, but as someone on the brink of a fall. Her heart pounded. She had to warn him. But how? She slipped into the shadows, her mind racing with thoughts of what she could do. If she tried to approach him now, what would happen? Would he dismiss her as just another beggar? Would he call security, throw her out, or worse, have her silenced before she even got the chance to speak? Suddenly, her phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her from her thoughts. It was an unknown number. Hesitant but compelled, she answered. Eliza. The voice on the other end said, cold and unfamiliar. You need to stay away from Victor. You've already seen too much. If you know what's good for you, you'll keep quiet. The phone went dead. Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't a warning. It was a threat. She had no choice. She had to act now. But as she stood there, paralyzed by fear and uncertainty, she realized the magnitude of what she was about to do. Was it too late to back out? Was she already in too deep? The next few days passed in a blur of dread and indecision. Eliza's mind was consumed by what she had learned about Victor's impending downfall. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of those who would suffer because of Garrett and Celine's twisted plans. But what could she do? She was just one person, vulnerable, homeless, and unimportant in the grand scheme of things. Her encounter with Victor earlier that week had only added to her turmoil. He had seemed so distant, so cold. She couldn't deny the raw intensity of his presence. But there was something else. Something that made her wonder if he knew more than he let on. Could he already be aware of the danger surrounding him? Was she the one who needed saving, not him? Eliza found herself standing outside one of Victor's luxury apartments days later, staring up at the glass facade that glinted in the daylight. The high-rise was a fortress, but the windows were dark now, as if the building itself had sensed the looming storm. She took a deep breath and walked towards the entrance. Inside, everything was pristine, too perfect. The scent of fresh flowers mixed with expensive cologne, and the soft glow of designer lighting made the place seem like a museum more than a home. But it felt wrong. A voice startled her from behind. You don't belong here. It was the building's security guard. Eliza froze, her pulse racing. Was this it? Was she about to be thrown out, her mission undone? I need to speak to Mr. Marshall, she stammered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. The guard didn't budge. Mr. Marshall doesn't entertain visits from people like you. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. She answered in a panic. Leave now. Don't try to speak to him, the voice ordered. You'll regret it. Eliza's heart sank. There was no time left. If she didn't act soon, it might be too late to stop the plot from unfolding. But how could she face Victor? How could she trust herself to deliver the warning when everything, every instinct, was telling her she was out of her depth? The clock was ticking, and as the security guard moved closer, she realized something terrifying. The danger was already closing in on her, and there was no turning back. The tension in the air was suffocating. Eliza stood at the entrance of the building's underground parking lot, her pulse pounding in her ears. She had received the call moments before, a message that sent chills down her spine. She was being watched, every move anticipated. A sudden realization hit her. The walls of this city, the place she had come to call home, were closing in. Nothing about her life was truly hers, not even her decision to warn Victor. As she stepped deeper into the parking lot, shadows from the towering concrete structures seemed to stretch, moving like serpents, whispering of the danger that lurked just beyond her line of sight. Victor's sleek black car sat idling, a beacon in the darkness. But it wasn't Victor who stepped out when the door swung open. It was Garrett Hayes. Eliza froze. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it, only calculated, cold menace. The kind of smile one wears when they know they have already won. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice a low rasp. "You've been a problem for too long, Eliza." She wanted to turn and run, but her feet were cemented in place. Fear gripped her chest, her breath shallow and erratic. How had he known where she'd be? How had he tracked her so easily? A sharp click echoed behind her, and she spun to see Celine Moore, her figure stepping out from the shadows with the same detached grace that had always marked her. "You were always so predictable," Celine said, her words laced with venom. "You thought you could save him, didn't you? Thought you could be a hero. But this is bigger than you, little girl." Eliza's heart sank as the full weight of the situation hit her. All this time, the game had never been about Victor. It had always been about her. "You're not here to stop us," Garrett continued, his voice growing darker. "You're here because you're part of the plan, Eliza. You always have been." For the first time, Eliza felt an overwhelming wave of panic. The ground beneath her feet seemed to tilt. This was no coincidence. Her entire existence, the desperate struggle for survival, had been manipulated from the start. She was nothing more than a pawn in their game. "All those times I saved you." Victor's voice rang in her ears. She had trusted him. But had he been using her all along? "Did you think I was helping you out of kindness?" "No, Eliza. You were always meant to lead me to this point." Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't a revelation, it was a betrayal. The man she had risked everything to warn, to protect, was complicit in the very plot to ruin her. Victor Marshall had known, and he had played her. "Did you really think you could change anything?" Garrett's mocking laughter echoed through the lot. "Did you think you were the hero of this story?" Eliza stumbled back, her legs weak, her mind spinning. Everything she thought she knew, the promises, the hope, the imagined alliances, crumbled in an instant. She had been deceived, and now there was no escape. The weight of the truth slammed into her chest. Eliza was the tool in their scheme, a means to an end. She had been manipulated all along, and the realization twisted like a knife. But as Garrett's shadow loomed closer, she felt something stir inside her. An anger, sharp and raw, that could not be ignored. She had been a victim, but she would not remain one. Not anymore. Through the haze of betrayal, Eliza's mind raced. The car. It was parked just far enough from the shadows of the columns that she could make it to the back seat without being seen. Garrett and Celine were too busy reveling in their victory to notice her sudden movement. Eliza made her move. The rush of adrenaline coursed through her as she sprinted toward the car, her heart thundering in her chest. The key to everything, her survival, the truth, was in the car. She grabbed the handle and jerked it open. But before she could slide in, Celine's hand shot out, grabbing her by the arm with inhuman strength. Eliza gasped, her body jerking backward as Celine's grip tightened like a vice. "You think you can escape?" Celine hissed, her voice sharp with fury. Eliza's breath caught in her throat as she struggled to break free. But Celine's hold was like iron. Yet, in that moment, Eliza's eyes fell on the dashboard, and the glint of something caught her eye. A small button, no bigger than a pin. Without thinking, Eliza slammed her palm against it. A sharp, mechanical whirring filled the air as the back of the car transformed, suddenly shifting into a hidden compartment beneath the floor. Garrett and Celine both turned in shock, their eyes widening in disbelief. Before they could react, a blinding flash of light engulfed the lot. The sound of metal scraping against metal filled the air, followed by the deafening roar of the parking garage doors being thrust open. The car's alarm blared, sending shockwaves through the concrete walls. Eliza, still holding onto the secret button, flung herself into the compartment, pulling the door shut behind her. The last thing she saw before the hatch sealed was Garrett's face, twisted in disbelief, his hand reaching out in vain. Her heart was racing as the car began to move. For a few precious seconds, she had escaped the clutches of death. But she knew it wasn't over. The truth was out there now, and no matter how much they tried to bury it, she had the leverage. The plan had been set in motion. Eliza wasn't the pawn anymore. She was the player. As the car sped down the darkened street, she closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her breath. There was still a long road ahead, but now, she had the chance to turn the tide. And she would. The battle had only just begun. The world felt different now, as though everything Eliza had known had been shattered in one devastating moment. The neon lights outside the car flickered weakly as it sped through the darkened streets. Her fingers tightened around the small metal object in her pocket, a reminder of her escape, of the betrayal, of the truth that now weighed heavy on her soul. Victor had been her rock, her only ally in a world that had never shown her any kindness. She had trusted him with her heart, with her fears, and with her dreams of a better life. She had believed in the man he had pretended to be. And now, everything she thought she knew had unraveled in an instant. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the images of Garrett and Celine's smug faces, their cruel satisfaction. But it was Victor's words that haunted her the most. "You were always meant to lead me to this point." It echoed in her mind like a cruel mantra. It wasn't just the plot against her that hurt. It was the fact that Victor, the one person she thought she could count on, had been in on it the entire time. The sting of betrayal was sharp, almost unbearable. It left a hollow ache in her chest, one that no amount of time could heal easily. She had always prided herself on being strong, independent, able to survive in a world that had no place for someone like her. But this was different. The person she had trusted the most had stabbed her in the back, and she felt its weight like a 1,000-pound anchor pulling her deeper into despair. As the car turned onto an unfamiliar street, Eliza's gaze drifted to the side window. The blur of passing lights and shadows seemed to mirror the chaos inside her heart. She had been alone before, but this loneliness was different. This wasn't the isolation she had grown accustomed to. This was the feeling of being completely adrift, betrayed by the one person who had promised to anchor her. The thought of going back to her old life, living on the streets, scavenging for survival, was almost more unbearable than the betrayal itself. But she wasn't the same person she had been before. She had seen too much, felt too much to go back to that. "Do you want to talk?" A voice broke her from her reverie. It was the driver, a calm and steady voice she hadn't expected to hear. It belonged to someone who had been there the entire time, watching from the sidelines, never once intervening, until now. Eliza didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared out the window, the cold city streets offering no answers, only more questions. She had known this driver, knew nothing of him. He had been silent, almost like a shadow. But now, in the aftermath of all that had happened, there was an odd sense of comfort in his presence. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" he said gently. "I've seen people break before, but you're still standing. You're stronger than you think." Eliza swallowed hard, trying to fight the lump in her throat. "I don't feel strong right now," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You will," the driver said, his tone unwavering. "You'll find your way. The truth is, you've already taken the first step." She nodded, unsure if she truly believed him. But in his words, there was a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time, hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep her going. For now. The days following her escape were a blur. Eliza kept moving, not daring to stop, to reflect too much. Her heart still ached, but the rawness of it had dulled, and with each passing moment, she found herself growing stronger. There was no time to dwell in self-pity, no room for the weight of betrayal to sink her completely. Victor was out of her life, but the scar he had left behind was still fresh. She had to focus on the next steps. Survival, yes, but more than that, she needed to take back control of her life. The world had tried to crush her, but she wasn't going down without a fight. The driver, Liam, as she had learned his name to be, remained a steady presence. His words from that night lingered in her mind, and in some strange way, they became her lifeline. He didn't push her to talk, didn't force her to confront the feelings she wasn't ready to face. But when she did speak, when she needed to vent, he was there, always patient, always understanding. It wasn't long before Eliza realized that Liam wasn't just a bystander. He had seen more than he had let on. There was a depth to him, a quiet strength that she admired but couldn't yet understand. But in the months that followed, their bond grew. Slowly, they became something more than just two people thrown together by circumstance. They became allies, friends, maybe even more. One evening, as they sat in a small cafe on the outskirts of the city, Liam broke the silence. "You're not alone anymore," he said, his voice soft but resolute. "You've got me now, and whatever happens, we'll face it together." Eliza looked up, the warmth in his words filling a space inside her she hadn't known was empty. She had spent so long trying to survive on her own, unwilling to let anyone close, afraid of what might happen if she did. But now, as she looked at Liam, she realized something. She didn't have to carry the weight alone. She didn't have to face the world's cruelty by herself. For the first time in a long while, Eliza felt a spark of peace. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid of it. She had fought, survived, and come out stronger. She had a future, a real one, and she was ready to take it on no matter what it would bring. Liam smiled, his eyes filled with quiet determination. "You're going to do great things, Eliza. Don't doubt that." The words lingered in her mind, offering a sense of comfort she hadn't known she'd been missing. Maybe it was true. Maybe there was a future waiting for her after all. And for the first time, she didn't feel like she was chasing something that was always out of reach. They had come a long way, and whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The bond they shared was unbreakable now, forged through fire and forged through truth. Eliza's journey wasn't over, but she had learned one of life's most precious lessons. She was not alone, and that, more than anything else, was her reward. Eliza's journey has come to a close, but her story is far from over. She's faced betrayal, loss, and countless obstacles. Yet through it all, she has learned the power of resilience and the importance of never giving up. But what about you? What would you do if everything you knew was ripped away from you in an instant? Would you rise above it like Eliza, or would you let the weight of the world crush you? This story isn't just Eliza's. It's a reminder to all of us that no matter how dark things seem, there is always a way forward. No matter how deep the betrayal, there is always hope. And with the right people by your side, nothing is impossible. But the journey doesn't stop here. What do you think happens next for Eliza? What choices will she make? The road ahead is still full of mysteries, and it's up to you to discover where it leads. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring you more gripping stories that inspire and challenge. Stay tuned for what's coming next. Eliza's journey is just getting started.